What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. It's time once again for another episode of Banlist Roulette. Ever wonder how Konami makes some of the most perplexing changes to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden and Limited list? Well, here we have their patented method. We're going to be going through a bunch of cards that could potentially get hit on the upcoming July ban list, and we're going to see where the wheel ends up putting them because sometimes this wheel can be frighteningly accurate. So without further ado, let's play some Banlist Roulette. So up first, we have a deck that a lot of people would really like to see hit in some form or another, and that deck is Dragon Link, because Dragon Link has been the best deck for far too long at this point. Obviously, the meta is shifting. We've got Tri-Brigade, we have Drytron, we have a bunch of other decks that are fighting for that tier 1 contention, but I think a lot of people are just really sick of Dragon Link at this point. The problem is, what exactly do you hit, right? Because I feel like this is a deck that you can't exactly just hit a single card. It's still going to be very powerful regardless. I think the biggest card on everyone's radar is LP, because LP is essentially the conduit for all these Dragon decks that they can just put all of their resources into, and that way LP is going to get them to exactly what they need. This is a card that people have been crying out to get banned for some time now, at least the past several lists, and I think that's the card we're going to start with today. So let's see where Guard Dragon LP ends up. Oh, and straight off the bat, Guard Dragon LP is banned. But the thing is, I don't really feel like that would do enough. Like, yeah, sure, LP's a very strong card, but some people are talking about maybe having the baby Chaos Dragons receive a hit. They're already limited, but banning them would stop them from being this recursive resource engine that's super powerful in tandem with a card like Chaos Space, and that would really severely reduce the deck's consistency. So let's see where White Dragon Wyver Burster and Black Dragon Collapse Serpent end up as well. All right, well, it looks like those are going to 3 in exchange for Guard Dragon LP Sins. I feel like that would actually boost the deck in terms of overall consistency, but another card that's a sort of stepping stone for the deck and one of the central combo pieces is Striker Dragon. This is another card that people are discussing should get hit in some form or another. Some people don't think banning it is necessary, but a limitation on it would definitely reduce the deck's consistency. It would still be able to compete without completely ruining the deck entirely. So let's go ahead and see where Striker Dragon ends up. All right, well, I guess people are getting their wish for the wheel, so LP banned, Striker Dragon limited, and the baby Chaos Dragons back at 3. I think Dragon Link probably maybe still comes out on top with the baby Chaos Dragons at 3. I don't know. You could also maybe argue Quick Launch because it's an emergency teleport for this specific archetype, and people argue that if emergency teleport's limited, how come Quick Launch is allowed to be at 3? You could say that emergency teleport's a bit more generic, but I don't know. I feel like maybe that's a decent argument, so let's see where Quick Launch should end up too, I guess. All right, well, Quick Launch is going to join Emergency Teleport right alongside it. I think now I want to move on away from Dragon Link because we probably did enough damage to that deck, or maybe even boosted it in some instances, depending on your perspective. But we have to talk about some of the other top decks of the format, right? One of those decks is, of course, Tri-Brigade Zoodiac. This is probably one of the most up-and-coming decks we have at the moment. A lot of people think it's the best deck of the current format, and the OCG, it's just been absolutely tearing things up. And we're starting to see a little bit of that here in the TCG. The problem is Konami really going to hit anything from the Tri-Brigade archetype when they do want to still sell Lightning Overdrive? Remember, Lightning Overdrive just came out, so it would be counterintuitive for their sales if they hit stuff directly in the deck, especially when it's not like mega oppressive like Pepe or anything like that. To be fair though, they could hit stuff like the Zoodiac cards. We saw in the OCG, Zoodiac Drytron actually got banned, so you can still play the Tri-Brigade cards, you just can't splash them with the Zoodiac. So I guess we should maybe put Zoodiac Drytron up on the chopping block and see what happens. Okay, Zoodiac Drytron to 2, that would make the deck much better. That would be insane, actually. Pure Zoodiac, Tri-Brigade Zoodiac would love it. Another card, though, that people have talked about and was hit on the OCG's ban list was Fire Formation Tenki, because not only is that a hit for Zoodiac, but it's also a hit for Tri-Brigade because Fractal is a Beast Warrior, so it does reduce your consistency a little bit, but the deck is still very playable, right? I don't really foresee them hitting anything else. That just doesn't really make sense. So let's see where Tenki ends up as well. All right, well, I guess Tenki's staying where it belongs, which means Tri-Brigade Zoodiac, according to the wheel anyway, might be the best deck of the July 2021 format. But to be honest, it might be the best deck regardless of what the wheel says. Now, Drytron's another deck that people are talking about, and the reason for that is Drytron is a deck that received a lot of support in Lightning Overdrive as well. And while it hasn't been having nearly the same success as Tri-Brigade Zoodiac, a lot of people are on this deck now, and a lot of people are thinking that decks like Dragon Link might get hit, giving the room for Drytron to ascend to tier 1 contention. I think that's very viable, but is that going to mean we're going to get any preemptive Drytron hits? I'm not exactly sure. We still have Ben 10 limited, but are we really going to see a hit to something like Nova, which I guess is like your quick launch or your emergency teleport? But even then, that still seems like a stretch. Maybe we can spin for Nova and see what happens. I don't know what else you would realistically hit in that deck. Maybe Alpha because it's the Searcher. Let's go ahead and spin to find out what happens. All right, well, we're banning one card or another. Man, this deck can just not catch a break in our format, can it? Some other players argue that cards such as Magical Meltdown or Nadir's Servant should get limited, but these decks haven't been seeing much success as of late, although they did in the very early iterations of the format, just because people weren't deck building appropriately for cards such as Winda. But I guess we could throw them on the wheel. I mean, the wheel knows all, apparently, so let's go ahead and start with Magical Meltdown. All right, well, Meltdown getting banned, I think, would definitely appease a lot of players, although I don't exactly see that one happening. I think that's probably the most likely candidate to get hit over something like Alistair. Magical Meltdown can just be very unfair at times. Let's go ahead and spin for Nadir's Servant as well. Okay, I guess we're killing this deck off entirely. I think people would be okay to not have to deal with Schism anymore, at least in the consistent way that you can access it through Nadir's Servant. But man, the wheel is being ruthless this time around. What is that, like the 4th or 5th ban we've had at this point? Who knows? Maybe we need a list like this. Now, next up, we want to discuss some cards that some players argue should come back into the game to help add to the variety of decks that are playable. The first of which is Orcust Harp Horror. Orcust hasn't really been playable in much competitive capacity. You have seen like this Orcust Eldritch deck running around, but putting Harp Horror to 1 could help Eldritch come into somewhat of competitive contention. I don't think it would be going to the top tiers, but at least the deck would be a little bit more playable than it is now. So let's go ahead and see where Orcust Harp Horror ends up. Okay, well, I guess we're getting what we want, and Orcust Harp Horror is coming in at 1. But what about another card that is a key combo piece for an older strategy from the Eternal format, and that is Salamangreat Mirage Stallion. Salamangreat's actually still very playable at the moment, but Mirage Stallion is just a nice way to be able to extend and get into the necessary cards in your deck, but it actually locks you into fire attribute summons only, which can prevent you from going into some of the OTK parts of the deck. But a lot of people feel like the card can go back to 1. I think it'd come back to 1, and Salamangreat wouldn't really move anywhere on the tier list. So let's see where Mirage Stallion ends up as well. Oh, I guess Mirage Stallion is not getting the same treatment as Orcust Harp Horror. I guess all cards are not treated equally. Since we're talking about boosting older archetypes, another card that a lot of people would like to see come back to 1 is Heavy Metal Foes Electromite. This is a card that is very controversial. It's at 1 in the OCG, and Pendulum doesn't really do a whole lot over there. And some people argue that if Isolde is legal and if Crystron Halki Fibrax is legal, then Heavy Metal Foes Electromite's probably okay too. I don't know if that's exactly a direct comparison, but I kind of see where they're coming from. I don't personally feel like if Electromite came back that it would really propel Pendulum to the top tiers of competitive play. It could still be a strong deck, but I don't know if it would be the best deck. We'd have to see though, but let's see what the wheel says because I'm very curious to see this one. Electromite to 2. Oh my god, the Pendulum players would be over the moon. Some players also feel like a deck like Dinosaur should receive a check or balance in some form or another, like hitting Miscellaneousaurus, maybe hitting Fossil Dig, or even Soul Eating Oviraptor, just to reduce the deck's consistency a little bit. I personally don't think the deck needs that. I think the deck is perfectly fine as is. Pretty strong contender, but not overwhelmingly so. So I think the card that most people would like to see hit to some degree is Miscellaneousaurus, just because it doesn't necessarily promote any sort of healthy interaction. So I guess we'll pick that one. So let's see what the wheel has to say about Miscellaneousaurus. Miscellaneousaurus to 2. You know, we did say that the deck wanted a small hit, and as much as I hate the semi-limited list, you know, maybe that wouldn't be the worst. You wouldn't be as likely for your opponent to open Miscellaneousaurus. They'd have to search it. I don't know. Maybe that could be a move. This format's a bit fascinating because up until Lightning Overdrive, Dragon Link was without a doubt the best deck, but now that we move into a post-Lightning Overdrive environment, Tri-Brigade, Zoodiac, and Drytron are trying to fight for that tier 1 spot. We still have a lot of diversity in this format, right? And a lot of the decks that we've talked about in this video thus far are still able to compete and do quite well at the larger events that are taking place. So it's a bit difficult to identify any particular cards that necessarily need to get hit or are must hits because it feels like it hasn't really been solidified yet with the new Lightning Overdrive format what the true problems are of this new format we're going to find ourselves in. Remember, we have King's Court coming out right in the beginning of July as well, and so that could also throw things off because who knows what the format's going to look like by then. So this is kind of a weird time to get a ban list. One card in particular I would like to see go that doesn't necessarily belong to a particular archetype is Red Reboot. I don't like the interaction that this card forces where being a counter trap, you need to have spell speed 3 interaction to be able to react to it. And most of the time that is a card like Solemn Judgment. And if you're the player on the receiving end of a Red Reboot and you don't have Solemn Judgment, well, you probably just lost the game immediately. But if you do have the Solemn Judgment, you had to pay 4,000 life points, which means the player who fired Red Reboot on you basically is now 50% of the way to kill you, and lowering that damage threshold means it is much easier to be able to clear you after that Red Reboot has been negated. It just doesn't seem like a very fair exchange, especially for like combo decks specifically, to be able to force other slower decks into that sort of position. And I think it's a card that a lot of people are starting to get sick of. I don't know, it's a weird one. Maybe it's just my personal preference, but I think the card should probably get banned. I think at one, it's a little bit sacky because it's like if your opponent has it and you don't have the out to it, then I mean, that's just going to be a complete nightmare for you. Compared to something like Harpy's Feather Duster or Lightning Storm specifically, those cards actually can be responded to compared to something like Red Reboot since it's a counter trap. So I don't know, I'd like to spin for it because I'd really like to see what the wheel thinks about Red Reboot. That might be an interesting one. Well, I guess the wheel agrees about Red Reboot as well. And since we're on the topic of cards that probably should get banned, can we please talk about Mystic Mine? Mystic Mine I have such split feelings about because while it's one of the few cards that you can actually play against combo decks that are just completely out of hand, because most of the time these combo decks don't have a way to out Mystic Mine, it just doesn't really encourage any sort of fun or interactive gameplay. And I'm not necessarily wanting to empathize with the combo players here, but I don't think it's really fun for them to just get stuck with a Mystic Mine and then the game just becomes, can you out the Mystic Mine before I kill you? Now, obviously you can make the argument that the combo player should get punished that way because they're trying to build a board and make it so that the opponent can't play, but I feel like that's not really justification for the card specifically to exist. I feel like we should hit both sides of the problem, and hitting one side of it being Mystic Mine probably makes sense. This is just such an infuriating card for so many people. So I want to see where Mystic Mine ends up because I'm so sick of this card, and I know a lot of other people are too. So let's see if the wheel can finally do its work and get rid of it. Mystic Mine to 2, I guess that's one less copy you might encounter, but that's a really weird one. And as per tradition here on Banlist Roulette, we have to end with everyone's favorite hand trap, Maxx C. Some players feel like Maxx C should come back to 3. Those players should be lowered very slowly head first into the top of an active volcano. It's just a very divisive card. Some players feel like it should be at 3. The smart players think it should be at 0. And it's always something that people want to fight around the time that we have a ban list. The OCG still has it at 3, but with a new archetype coming in one of the new core sets that plays around it completely, they're probably shitting themselves because now they don't know what they're gonna do because they no longer have that protection. But it's Maxx C time, baby. Let's see what happens. Hopefully it doesn't go anywhere other than 0 where it rightfully belongs, but it's time to spin for it. Let's see what happens. I mean, I think 2 may be the worst option out of the bunch because at least if it's at 3, you can deck build around it. If it's at 0, you don't have to worry about it. Maybe just having it at 1 is worse because then it becomes extra sacky, but 2? Really? I don't know what to say. The wheel was absolutely brutal this episode, and what a fitting end to 50 cards getting banned than to put one of the most hated cards in the game at 2 of all things. 2? Are you fucking kidding me? So guys, that's gonna wrap it up for this episode of Banlist Roulette. Be sure to stay tuned for tomorrow where we do our more in-depth analysis on the actual banlist prediction, so that way we can have a better, more serious discussion on what we might expect for the July format. But be sure to let me know down in the comments what you guys think about this new ban list coming up soon. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you all so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video entertaining, consider supporting me on Patreon for exclusive early one-day access to both the history of Yu-Gi-Oh and the Yu-Gi-Oh progression series. Thanks so much again, and we will see you next time.